We heard from the book of Revelation, God's temple in heaven was opened, and the Ark of the Covenant could be seen in the temple. Well, what's the Ark of the Covenant? And why is this kind of unique that it should be seen in the temple? Because it wasn't in the temple at the time of Jesus. The Ark of the Covenant is something that God asked Moses to fabricate after about a year after they left Egypt. But they're still wandering in the desert, but at this moment they're at the base of Sinai. And they've already received the 10 Commandments. And they're starting to be formed as a new nation. And so God asks Moses to make this container, a special container made out of acacia wood, and then gold plating all around it and at the top and underneath. And then put some rings on the side so that you can pass poles through so that people can lift it up on their shoulders and carry it, on either side, different poles and up in front and back. And then the lid is also quite elaborate. Again, all of this is gold plated. The lid has 2 angels facing each other. In fact, we had a family reunion, and I said Mass for my family and some of my little nieces and nephews when I was dressed like this. You look like an angel. I go, well, I guess I do. I hadn't thought about it. So the angels, they have their wings extended, so it has, them hanging down like that. And they're sitting across from each other on this elaborate lid, the top of the Ark of the Covenant, and the angels facing each other, sort of, protecting it, if you will. And so what is inside there? What did God ask? Why did God ask Moses to make this? It was to contain things that were sacred to the people of Israel, that were formational to them, part of their story. The 10 Commandments, the tablets themselves, were kept in the Ark of the Covenant. Also the staff of Aaron, because the staff of Aaron, Moses used that sometimes as a sign of his authority, especially and most famously when he first appeared to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, let God's people go to worship in the desert. And Pharaoh wasn't giving him the time of day. And to show that, as a sign, he had Aaron cast this staff down to the ground, and it turned into a snake, a long, big snake. And then Pharaoh had his sorcerers throw their staff to the ground, and those all 3 turned into snakes. And so they thought, so there. And then Aaron's snake ate all the others. Just saying. So, and then it turned back into a staff, and it was fine. So that was an important symbol of God's working through Moses and his brother and Aaron and their authority before Pharaoh to get Pharaoh's attention and let God's people go. And then the third thing, and the only other item in there that's kept in there is the manna. They were hungry and they pleaded, why did God leave us in this desert to starve to death? And so God sent bread from heaven, the manna. And there's a bowl of manna that would also be kept in the Ark of the Covenant to remind them of God's care for them. Now, we as Christians can't help but look ahead and say, oh, it's a foreshadowing of the Eucharist, right? The bread from heaven, Christ himself who becomes present on this altar. But these were the signs of God's presence in the community. Wherever they went, traveling and wandering in the desert, the ark always went ahead of the people as they're going anywhere. And even when they go into the promised land, the Levites, that's of the tribe who would take turns carrying the ark, when they were to cross the river Jordan, God told them, go ahead and cross, but have them with the ark go and stop in the water. And they stopped, and then the water backed up. And, it was like the Red Sea with it split. And so all the Israelites could pass through just walking on the soil, on the ground, and not having to get wet. And all of them got to the other side, and then the Ark of the Covenant came out, and then the waters of the Jordan River flowed back, and they entered the Promised Land that way. But the Ark was very significant. And so when David felt the call to build a temple, he didn't build it. His son Solomon eventually built it. That's where the Ark was kept. And it was, of course, the most sacred item and a sign of God's presence. And there are many signs and wonders that accompanied the Ark of the Covenant. And it was kept there until The Babylonians eventually came and conquered Jerusalem and desecrated the temple, and since then it was lost to history. We don't know where it is. But people have been very motivated for centuries to find it, and so it's probably not findable. It may be out there somewhere. Of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you saw the movie, that was featured in there. That's just a story. And at the end of the movie, it shows it being stored in some warehouse in Washington, D.C., and, way up, yeah. But that's not true. So we just don't know where it is. But so we haven't had the Ark of the Covenant, and in Israel's mind, haven't had the presence of God among them until in the fullness of time, God sent his only Son and sent an angel to be a herald of that gift of salvation and ask Mary, this young woman in Nazareth, to be the mother of God. And then God became present in her womb. And so Mary is often referred to as the Ark of the Covenant because she carries in her the presence of God. Not a figurative presence of the 10 Commandments and the staff and the manna, but the true presence of God in Jesus Christ himself. And she takes Christ to others, as we have in this gospel account of the visitation, visiting her cousin Elizabeth, who in her womb is carrying John the Baptist. When the angel Gabriel came to Mary, one of the things that the angel said to convince her of the power of God's word and God's grace is that your cousin Elizabeth, who they thought was barren, and she's quite elderly, in any normal circumstance would be impossible to conceive, but she is in her 6th month with John the Baptist. And then there's this great moment that we get to hear described here when Mary shows up, and as soon as Elizabeth hears her voice, John leaps for joy because he knows the Lord is here. And there's a beautiful description of this that St. Ambrose does, where he describes how these two women are in conversation, but their sons are also in conversation. It's just a beautiful image, but we recognize how she is the ark. She brings Christ to the world. Now, of course, and every mother will say this, motherhood does not end at the birth of the child. It's in some ways only beginning. And so Mary, after she went back to Nazareth, she stayed around for 3 months, it says at the end of the gospel. Why? Because if Elizabeth's in her 6th month, 3 more months, she was there for the birth of John, probably helped Elizabeth around the house for a while till new routines are started, and then goes back to prepare for the birth of her own child. And we know it's a very famous story. We know all about that. But after she gave birth to Christ, then eventually teaching him to walk, fixing scrapes and caring for him and feeding him and teaching him his alphabet and all those kind of things that every mom does to form a human being, because he was fully human and fully divine. But the human side, we can't pay lip service. He didn't just automatically know everything. Humans have to learn, and so that was part of the process. Plus, if he was bullied or treated poorly by others, and talk to him about that, because it'd be emotional or difficult circumstance, and he had to, his human side had to mature. That's just, we don't know exactly how all that works, but in all of that, she's caring for him. And then, of course, walking with him in the ministry. We hear her referred to several times throughout the ministry of the life of Jesus. And then, of course, walking with him along the way of the cross. I just can't imagine anything more agonizing for a mother to have to endure, is watching the way her son was treated so cruelly and being powerless to do anything about that. And then seeing him murdered, put to death on the cross, and the torturous way in which they treated him. And I heard someone once say it this way. I thought this is beautiful. It stuck with me. Is there were a lot of people there who were jeering at Jesus and shouting at him and spitting on him and mocking him, and even at the crucifixion. And as he's hanging on the cross, Mary was there. That's the tenacity of a mother's heart, but she was exemplary in all of that. She was there. And why was it so important for her to be there? And this is how someone put it once. That when Jesus looks down and sees all this mean-spirited activity directed toward him and hatred, that he would see at least one set of eyes looking back at him with love, with absolute unconditional love, and saying, you are loved. I'm here. I'm here. I just think that's so important, that she was with him in the good times, but also in the most difficult times. And that's where she's such an important example to us of what it means to be a disciple, to follow Christ, to follow her son. In fact, I've been asked sometimes, why do you Catholics give so much attention to Mary? And my response to that is, why do the other Christian traditions not give her any attention at all? I mean, after everything she was there for, how could you ignore that and not recognize the importance of her in the story of our salvation? Not just at the birth, but all the way through. And she was there even after he ascended into heaven at Pentecost. She's there for so many important moments of our salvation. Why wouldn't we give her that much attention? So that's one thing to ponder, and it exemplifies that's how disciples should act, the tenacity of faith and presence that she had. Well, when we receive the body and blood of Christ into our bodies, think about this. We're departing from here carrying Christ in our bodies, just as Mary carried Christ in her body. We now are also sharing in that role of Ark of the Covenant. We're carrying Christ to others, as Mary carried Christ to Elizabeth in her womb and others that she met. We're called to bring Christ to others and to let people be drawn to his goodness by the way we treat him. And figuratively, we always have Christ in us. If we're baptized Christians, that's a recognition that Christ is always with me, but especially after receiving communion. We should be conscious of that and the responsibility that comes from that, to honor him by the way we treat each other, but also how we walk with each other. Notice how Mary walked with Christ in all those difficult times. We're called to walk with people throughout their lives, especially our family, spouses with each other, parents with their children, siblings with each other, and also our friends. But we walk the journeys of life in the good times and in the bad. And we stick with people. We stick with the people we love, especially when things are difficult, just like Mary stayed there at the foot of the cross for her son. We're also called to be there, to look in someone's eyes, let them know there's someone here who loves you, especially when you're going through the worst moments of your life. I'm here. I'm here. And Christ is here with us. And not only is we carry Christ in us, but also wherever two or more are gathered, I am with you. Jesus promises that. So that's the call of discipleship. So as we remember Mary's assumption into heaven and how she's honored in that way because of her fidelity to God, we should remind ourselves this is a call to action, to live as Mary did. The first among all disciples she was, but may we live up to that, live into that, and walk with people and bring Christ in our hearts and in our bodies after communion to other people and share his love generously.